Hey everyone, it's Last Protagonist. I recently received a demo key for Moadra, an upcoming Metroidvania that caught my eye for how much it resembled the Metroid games of old. Long story short, if you're a fan of games like Super Metroid and Metroid Dread, chances are you're really going to enjoy this one. The basic gist of this story is that you're Moadra, a reconnaissance operator sent to an abandoned planet to try and figure out what's happened to the princess who accompanied the research expedition team that was sent to this alien world before you. Compared to previous Metroid titles, I really like the inclusion of NPCs that help direct the player and fill in the gaps of the story, and I hope the system they have established is more robust and fleshed out in the full version of the game. Anyway, as you proceed exploring the alien world, a certain incident happens and Moadra is forced into a symbiotic relationship with alien microorganisms that morph his physiology into that of a living weapon. Throughout the demo, there were 3 different weapon types available out of 6, and while they were all kind of fun to use in their own way, the Gatling gun felt like it had the most utility in killing swarms of enemies, though I imagine the spiked arms abilities to tunnel through walls could have some more interesting utility later on. Like most traditional Metroidvanias, Moadra is packed with secrets in the form of power-ups and supplies, as well as plenty of backtracking. This did make traveling between some sections of the map a bit tedious, and movement felt simultaneously fluid and downright awkward at times. I know the devs said they were looking into touching up some of the controls before the full release, but as of the time of this review, there are a couple of issues holding things back. For me, having the crouch button dedicated to the left shoulder trigger felt needlessly limiting, and I was shocked to learn that holding down on the analog stick doesn't cause Moadra to crouch automatically. I think the reason for this is that even while Moadra is crouched, he can still fire his weapon in all directions, and the devs may have thought it'd be too awkward to control crouch rolling and firing at the same time. And on that note, Moadra's current fastest movement ability comes from holding crouch, pressing the jump button, and rolling forward. On one hand, while I think this is cool, and I appreciate being able to fire weapons in any direction while rolling around, I guess Moadra's base movement feels a little sluggish in comparison, and I think this issue really gets highlighted when you come to the area in the waste with the crashed spaceship. There's a bit of a chasm between a cliff and the hull of the ship, and in order to navigate this chasm, the most effective thing you can do is jump after you come out of a roll to preserve your forward momentum and catapult yourself forward. Discovering these kinds of movement techs is fun, but it also makes the rest of the movement at a baseline level feel worse because it inadvertently incentivizes players to continuously roll dash across the world, and having to constantly hold down the left trigger and spam the A button feels rather tedious if you're going to be doing that for the majority of the game. Of course, this is just the demo, and Moadra may get some other movement tech later on in the game, but I can only comment on the state of the game as it's given to me, and I'd highly recommend the devs implement a little dash or tackling maneuver to increase Moadra's movement speed across these kinds of gaps without having to rely on crouch rolling. I know this is a lot easier said than done though, because sudden buffs to the player's move speed can end up breaking the game in unforeseen ways, so I wouldn't be surprised to see things remain as is. Controls in general need some work, and I'm a little baffled that rebinding keys wasn't possible even in the demo version of the game. Right now, Moadra's movement is controlled entirely with the left stick, including where he's firing. I was actually surprised at how finely the controls worked for aiming the weapon, but the issue with this is that if you're trying to aim in front of you, Moadra will walk toward the enemy, which can be less than ideal. There is a lock-on feature, but this has its own set of issues. Right now, the only way to fire Moadra's weapons is by pressing X on an Xbox controller or square on a PlayStation one. This makes it so that if you want to switch your lock-on, you need to either move your thumb away from the fire button to the analog stick to cycle between targets, or you need to be some kind of claw grip using freak. Additionally, because some enemies and projectiles are fired at the player very quickly, you might not have enough time to redirect your fire to the proper threat before you get hit, and there are going to be numerous times you'll end up taking what feels like easily preventable damage merely because of the current control scheme. My suggestion to the developers would be to first move the primary fire button to one of the triggers or shoulder buttons, so that way players' thumbs will be free to cycle between targets. And then to seriously consider switching aiming controls from the left stick to the right stick. This would allow Moadra to fire his weapon while stationary, and maybe allow for shooting while strafing backward as well, which would make it easier to deal with targets that are barreling down on the player. I'd also really like it if the game would pause while the player cycled between weapons for similar reasons, but this might not feel as necessary if we were to get twin stick controls. I realize these suggestions might severely affect the balance of the current enemy and boss design, but I guarantee it'll make the game feel much better. My other major complaint about movement right now is that in order to grab onto a cliff ledge, You need to hold forward with the analog stick, and if you press up to try to mantle it, instead you'll just let go and fall down, which feels unintuitive as hell. Instead, the way you're supposed to climb ledges is by holding forward and then pressing the jump button to land back on the platform you want to get to. This feels really bad and is probably the most frustrating thing I've found so far, which is to say it isn't a game breaker, just more of an acquired taste. It'd be really nice if they added another animation to climb ledges before the final release, but we'll just have to wait and see. One of the more interesting aspects of Moadra is the implementation of the scanning tool. As one might expect, it allows you to scan the environment, similar to the scan visor in Metroid Prime. And from it, we get access to environmental lore details which are always neat and the ability to see hidden passages and walls. While I really like this idea on paper, I found that while playing the game, the scanning feature ended up feeling rather tedious and clunky. I think the reason for this is that your scanner is essentially a free-floating pod that you need to control directly with the right analog stick, and it only illuminates a limited area around itself, meaning you need to either keep maneuvering it around or switching between the scan mode and visual mode to see what you're doing. As I touched on before, because primary weapon fire is bound to the X or square button, you can't simultaneously control the position of the scanner and fire weapon at enemies, so if you do try to engage enemies while in scan mode, your visibility could get severely limited if the enemies move outside the range of the scanner. In some ways, because of the hidden walls and collectible lore, it almost feels preferable to play through the entire game with the scanner on, which reduces the visibility of the environment, to only turn it off in wide open areas or places you've already explored. So it's kind of like the devs are going through all this extra work to make environments that look good, yet are designed to be ignored. It's really tough to comment on ways to improve this system because it's so baked into the game that any suggestion is going to come with significant drawbacks. Increasing the area the scanner illuminates, for instance, would completely trivialize exploration since there'd be almost no incentive to play through the game with the scanner off, and hidden passages would become virtually a thing of the past. Removing the scanner also doesn't seem feasible because you'd be throwing out all the lore and environmental details that go with it. Right now, I think there are too many things to scan in the beginning of the game, and it feels really choppy game pace-wise, as well as a little awkward having to manually position the camera over each scannable item. Instead, it may be worth considering expanding the area the scanner illuminates, and rather than having to manually control it, only allowing the scanner to lock onto scannable targets like enemies. It may also be worth considering, rather than having the scanner toggle on and off, to make it an active press instead. I don't know though, maybe that wouldn't be sufficient for large hidden areas. It's a tough problem to fix. Even though these might seem like pretty big negatives, I think the game is actually in a pretty decent state, and I was both surprised at how big the demo was, and genuinely disappointed when it ended because I wanted to play more. I'll be looking forward to Moadra when it fully releases, and if you're into games like Super Metroid, you should be too. Anyway, that'll be it for now. If you enjoyed the video, let me know with a like, a comment, or a sub, and let me know what you think of Moadra. Are you into the Super Metroid aesthetic, and are you going to play the demo? Or are you going to wait until the full version releases? Until next time, stay safe, take care. Last Protagonist out.